The sound of shattering glass pierced the quiet night as Clara Dawson ducked beneath the kitchen table, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. Henry's drunken rage had reached new heights this evening, the remnants of her mother's china tea set now scattered across the wooden floor of their modest home in San Andreas, California, a small mining settlement nestled in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada range. Worthless. Henry slurred, swaying in the doorway. Just like you, Clara, completely worthless. It was 1872, and Clara had endured 5 years of marriage to a man who had changed from the charming suitor who'd courted her into the bitter, gambling drunk who now stood before her. At 23, she found herself trapped in a life that bore no resemblance to the dreams she'd once harbored. "Henry, please," she whispered, slowly emerging from her hiding place. Her fingers trembled as she smoothed down her faded blue dress. "You've been drinking again. Let me make you some coffee and we can talk." Henry lurched forward, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "Talk? About what? How I lost everything tonight? How that bastard Rowley cheated me? Or maybe about how I put our house up as collateral?" Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "You did what?" "You heard me." Henry's laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. "It's gone, Clara. The house, the land, all of it. By this time tomorrow, we'll be living on the streets." Clara's knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "You can't be serious." "This was my father's homestead. It's all we had," Henry corrected, pulling a half-empty bottle from his coat pocket. "All we had." Clara's mind raced. Her parents had died 3 years earlier, leaving her this small house and the 2 acres it sat on. It wasn't much, but it was home, the only security she had in this harsh frontier life. And now, with a single reckless night at the card tables, Henry had thrown it all away. "Who?" she managed to ask, her voice barely audible. "Who holds our debt now?" Henry took a long swig from his bottle. "Rowley, that snake, said he'd give me a chance to win it back next week." He staggered toward her, reaching for her arm. "But I have a plan, Clara. I need just a little more money to get back in the game." Clara jerked away from him. "No, Henry, there is no more money. The last of my savings went to pay your debts last month." His face twisted with anger. "The silver brooch your mother gave you would fetch a good price." "I already sold it," Clara whispered, the admission causing a fresh wave of pain. "To pay the butcher's bill after you lost your wages 3 weeks ago." Henry's open palm struck her cheek before she could react, sending her sprawling against the wall. The sharp sting brought tears to her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned long ago that tears only fueled his cruelty. "You're lying," he hissed. "You've always been hiding things from me." Clara touched her burning cheek, meeting his gaze with quiet defiance. "I have nothing left to hide, Henry. You've taken it all." Something in her tone must have penetrated his drunken haze. He stared at her for a long moment before turning away, muttering curses under his breath. "I'm going back to the saloon. Don't wait up." The door slammed behind him, leaving Clara alone in the wreckage of her kitchen. She allowed herself precisely 30 seconds to feel the crushing weight of despair before pushing it aside. Self-pity wouldn't save her home. She needed to think. Clara lit a lamp and sat at the table, mentally calculating what little she had left. The house would be claimed tomorrow, according to Henry. She had less than $1 hidden in a jar of flour, her wedding ring, which might fetch a few dollars at the pawn shop, and her sewing skills, which occasionally brought in small commissions from the wealthier ladies in town. None of it would be enough to save her home. As the night deepened, Clara made her decision. She would confront this man Rowley herself. Perhaps she could negotiate some arrangement time to pay the debt in installments or work to offset what Henry owed. It was a desperate plan, but she had no other options. Morning arrived with a watery light filtering through the curtains. Henry had not returned, which was not unusual after his gambling binges. Clara dressed carefully in her best dress, a navy blue cotton with only one carefully mended tear at the hem, and pinned her honey brown hair into a modest bun. If she was to plead for her home, she would do so with as much dignity as she could muster. The walk to town took 20 minutes, each step along the dusty road steeling her resolve. San Andreas had grown significantly since the gold rush days, but it was still a rough-edged town where fortunes were made and lost overnight. The gambling halls and saloons did brisk business at all hours, catering to miners, ranchers, and the assorted drifters that frontier life attracted. The Golden Nugget Saloon was the largest establishment on the main street, its freshly painted exterior a stark contrast to the weathered buildings surrounding it. Clara hesitated at the batwing doors, gathering her courage. She had never entered a saloon before. Respectable women simply didn't, but desperate circumstances called for desperate measures. The interior was dim after the bright morning sunlight, and the smell of stale whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies assaulted her senses. A few early patrons nursed drinks at scattered tables, while a tired-looking woman in a scandalously low-cut dress swept the floor. All conversation stopped as Clara stepped inside. "I'm looking for Mr. Rowley," she announced, her voice steadier than she felt. A tall man at the bar turned slowly, revealing an expensively tailored suit and a gold watch chain that glinted in the lamplight. "I'm Theodore Rowley, madam. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Clara straightened her shoulders. "My name is Clara Dawson. I believe you played cards with my husband last night." Understanding dawned in Rowley's eyes, followed quickly by a calculating gleam that sent a chill down Clara's spine. "Ah, yes, Mr. Dawson. Unfortunate evening for him." He gestured to a private table in the corner. "Perhaps we should discuss this matter more discreetly." Clara followed him, acutely aware of the stares following her progress across the room. She sat primly on the edge of her chair, hands folded in her lap. "Mr. Rowley, I understand my husband gambled away our home last night. I've come to ask for your mercy. That house is all we have." Rowley studied her for a moment, his eyes lingering on her face in a way that made her skin crawl. "Your husband owes me $200, Mrs. Dawson. The property is worth considerably more." "I'd say I've already shown exceptional mercy." "We can pay you back," Clara insisted. "If you'll just give us some time. Your husband has had time. He's been borrowing from me for months." Rowley leaned forward. "But perhaps we can come to some other arrangement." The implication in his tone was unmistakable. Clara felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. "I'm asking for a fair business agreement, Mr. Rowley, nothing more," he laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Business, Mrs. Dawson, is exactly what I'm proposing. Your husband mentioned you're quite skilled with a needle. Perhaps you could work off some of his debt in my establishment. My girls always need costume repairs." Clara's throat tightened at the thought of working among the saloon women, but she forced herself to consider it. If it meant keeping her home, how long would it take to work off the debt? "Oh, a year, perhaps 2, Rowley shrugged, "depending on how amenable you are to additional duties." Clara stood so abruptly her chair tipped backward, crashing to the floor. "I see that I've wasted my time, Mr. Rowley. Good day." She turned to leave, but his hand shot out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. "Your husband also mentioned you have a temper," he said, his voice hardening. "You should know that I'll be taking possession of your property this afternoon. If you're still there, I'll have the sheriff remove you." "Let go of me," Clara said, her voice low but firm. "Everything all right here?" The new voice cut through the tension like a knife. Clara turned to see a tall man standing nearby, his stance casual but somehow emanating controlled power. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jawline dusted with stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. Rowley released Clara's wrist immediately. "Just a business discussion, Griffin. Nothing that concerns you." "When a lady looks uncomfortable in your presence, Rowley, it becomes my concern." The stranger Griffin nodded slightly to Clara. "Madam." "This is a private matter," Rowley insisted, his confident demeanor slipping slightly. Griffin didn't move. "The lady was just leaving, weren't you, madam?" Clara nodded, grateful for the unexpected ally. "Yes, I was, thank you." She made her way toward the door, feeling Rowley's glare boring into her back. Outside, the bright sunlight momentarily blinded her, and she took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. By nightfall, she would be homeless, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. "Mrs. Dawson." She turned to find the stranger Griffin had followed her outside. In the daylight, she could see him clearly. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something compelling about his face, a quiet strength in his eyes that put her instantly at ease despite her precarious circumstances. "Yes, Griffin Paxton." He introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Couldn't help overhearing some of your conversation with Rowley. Sounds like you've found yourself in a difficult situation." Clara fought the urge to break down in tears. "My husband gambled away our home last night. Mr. Rowley is claiming it this afternoon." Griffin's expression darkened. "Rowley's known for rigging his games. Your husband probably never had a fair chance." "That doesn't change the fact that I'll be homeless in a matter of hours," Clara replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Griffin studied her for a long moment. "I have a cabin about 3 miles north of town. It's not much, but there's a spare room. You'd be welcome to stay there until you get back on your feet." Clara stared at him, stunned by the offer. "Mr. Paxton, you don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know Rowley is a snake who preys on desperate men, and I know that no decent woman should be forced to consider the kind of arrangement he was suggesting." Clara hesitated. The offer was both a lifeline and a risk. A woman living under the roof of a man who wasn't her husband or family would be scandalous, potentially ruinous to her reputation. But what choice did she have? The alternative was the street, or worse, accepting Rowley's indecent proposal. "Why would you help me?" she asked cautiously. Griffin's expression softened slightly. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to lose everything through no fault of your own." He paused. "I'll be heading back around sundown. If you decide to accept my offer, meet me at the crossroads north of town. If not, I understand." Before she could respond, he touched the brim of his hat in a polite gesture and walked away, leaving Clara standing alone in the dusty street, weighing impossible choices in the unforgiving light of day. Clara returned home to find Henry sprawled across their bed, still fully clothed and reeking of whiskey. She packed quickly and quietly, taking only what she could carry in a single carpet bag: 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's silver hairbrush, a worn Bible, and the photograph of her parents on their wedding day. She hesitated over her wedding ring before slipping it back onto her finger. Whatever Henry's failings, she was still legally his wife. As she moved through the rooms, touching familiar objects for the last time, a profound sadness settled over her. This small house had been her childhood home, the place where her mother had taught her to sew and cook, where her father had read to them by lamplight during the long winter evenings. Now it would belong to a man like Theodore Rowley, who would probably turn it into housing for his saloon girls or tear it down entirely. Clara paused at the kitchen door for one last look. Henry still hadn't stirred. Part of her wanted to wake him, to force him to face the consequences of his actions. But what would be the point? He would rage and blame her, or worse, beg her forgiveness with promises they both knew he wouldn't keep. She left without saying goodbye, closing the door softly behind her. The afternoon stretched before her with nowhere to go. Clara walked to the small church at the edge of town, finding solace in its empty quiet. She sat in a pew, her carpetbag at her feet, and tried to pray for guidance. The hours passed, marked only by the shifting patterns of light through the stained glass windows. By late afternoon, Clara had made her decision. Griffin Paxton's offer represented her only viable option. She would accept his hospitality temporarily, just long enough to formulate a plan for her future. Perhaps she could find work in one of the neighboring towns where no one knew her, Sacramento, or even San Francisco. As the sun began its descent, Clara made her way to the crossroads north of town. She stood beneath a gnarled oak tree, her carpetbag clutched in both hands, anxiety and uncertainty battling within her. What if he didn't come? What if he did, and his intentions weren't as honorable as they seemed? The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Griffin appeared on a sturdy bay horse, leading a second mount, a gentle-looking dun mare. He dismounted in a fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle. "You came," he said simply. Clara nodded. "I had nowhere else to go." If he was offended by her honesty, he didn't show it. Instead, he took her carpetbag and secured it behind his saddle. "Ever ridden before?" "Not since I was a girl," Clara admitted. Griffin offered her a hand. "Daisy here is gentle as they come. She'll take good care of you." Clara hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. His palm was calloused, his grip secure as he helped her mount. The mare stood patiently as Clara arranged her skirts and found her balance. "Thank you," she said, looking down at him, "for your kindness to a stranger." Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of some old pain, before he nodded once and mounted his own horse. "It'll be dark soon. We should get moving." They rode in companionable silence as the day faded into twilight. The trail wound through rolling hills, dotted with oak trees and tall grass that swayed in the evening breeze. After the emotional turmoil of the day, Clara found the rhythmic motion of the horse soothing, the widening distance from San Andreas a physical manifestation of her separation from her old life. "It's just ahead," Griffin said, after they'd been riding for nearly an hour. Clara looked up to see a small cabin nestled against a hillside, a thin curl of smoke rising from its stone chimney. A creek meandered nearby, and a small corral stood to one side. It was modest but well-maintained, with a vegetable garden visible in the fading light. "You live here alone?" she asked as they approached. Griffin nodded. "Just me and the horses." They dismounted in front of the cabin. Clara's legs wobbled slightly after the long ride, but she managed to stay upright. Griffin tended to the horses while she waited awkwardly, unsure of her place in this strange new situation. "Come on in," he finally said, carrying her carpetbag. "I keep a pot of stew going most days. You must be hungry." The cabin's interior was surprisingly neat and well-ordered. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable-looking chairs drawn up before it. A table and 2 chairs stood near a small kitchen area, while a curtain partially concealed what appeared to be a sleeping space. Shelves lined with books suggested Griffin Paxton was more than just a rough frontiersman. "The spare room is through there," Griffin indicated a door to the right. "It's not much, but it's private." Clara followed him into a small room containing a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand with a pitcher and basin. A window overlooked the creek, and a colorful quilt covered the bed. "This is lovely," she said sincerely, taking her carpet bag from him. "Thank you." Griffin shifted uncomfortably. "I'll let you get settled. Supper in about 20 minutes if you're hungry." Left alone, Clara sat heavily on the bed, the reality of her situation finally hitting her full force. 24 hours ago, she had been in her own home, maintaining the fiction of a normal marriage despite Henry's increasingly erratic behavior. Now she was in a stranger's cabin, her future uncertain, her life completely upended. She allowed herself exactly 2 minutes of silent tears before washing her face in the basin and changing into her other dress. Whatever happened next, she would face it with dignity and strength. Her parents had raised her to be resilient, and she wouldn't dishonor their memory by falling apart now. When she emerged, Griffin was stirring a pot hanging over the fire. He'd removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. He looked up as she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Feel better?" "Much, thank you." Clara moved toward the fire, drawn by the comforting aroma of the stew. "Can I help with anything? There's bread in that box," he nodded toward a wooden container on the table, "and plates on the shelf." They worked together in silence, setting the table and serving the food. It was oddly domestic, and Clara found herself wondering about this quiet man who had offered sanctuary to a woman he barely knew. "This is delicious," she said after tasting the stew, which was rich with venison and root vegetables. "Thank you." Griffin broke off a piece of bread. "I learned to cook out of necessity, never much cared for trail food." Clara gathered her courage. "Mr. Paxton, Griffin," he interrupted. "Just Griffin, Griffin," she amended. "I want you to know that I don't intend to impose on your hospitality for long. I'll be looking for work as soon as possible." He regarded her thoughtfully. "No rush. Winter's coming and jobs will be scarce until spring. Even so, I can't just Mrs. Dawson," he cut in gently. "You've had a difficult day. Perhaps we could discuss future arrangements tomorrow." Clara nodded, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion that had settled over her. "You're right. And please call me Clara." After supper, Griffin insisted on washing the dishes while Clara sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and trying not to think about what Henry might be doing now. Had he discovered her gone? Was he searching for her? Or had he already moved on to the nearest saloon? "I'll be sleeping in the lean-to out back," Griffin said, breaking into her thoughts. "There's a lock on your door if you'd feel more comfortable using it." Clara looked up in surprise. "You're giving up your bed." "The lean-to is fine for me," he assured her. "I often sleep there in summer anyway." The consideration behind this gesture touched Clara deeply. "Thank you, Griffin, not just for the room but for—" She gestured vaguely, "everything." He nodded once, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get some rest, Clara. Morning comes early out here." After Griffin left, Clara secured the cabin door and retreated to her room. She changed into her nightdress, said her prayers, and slipped beneath the quilt. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, the sheets clean and smelling faintly of sunlight. Outside, an owl hooted softly, and the creek burbled a gentle lullaby. Despite the turmoil of the day, sleep claimed her quickly. Her last conscious thought a quiet wonder at the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this peaceful cabin in the wilderness. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the light filtering through the window waking Clara earlier than usual. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-muddled mind. Then yesterday's events came rushing back, and she closed her eyes briefly against the wave of emotion. No time for self-pity, she reminded herself firmly. She rose, washed quickly in the cold water from the pitcher, and dressed in her everyday dress. After pinning her hair in a simple knot, she emerged into the main room to find Griffin already up and tending the fire. "Good morning," she said, smoothing her skirt nervously. Griffin straightened, giving her a brief nod. "Morning. Hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you." Clara moved toward the kitchen area. "May I fix us some breakfast?" "Already taken care of." Griffin gestured to the fire, where a pot of oatmeal bubbled gently. "But there's coffee to be made if you're inclined." Clara busied herself with the coffee pot, grateful for the familiar task. As she worked, she observed Griffin covertly. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly, a man in his early 30s, perhaps, with the lean, muscular build of someone who worked hard for a living. His movements were efficient, almost graceful, and his eyes, when they briefly met hers, were a striking gray-blue that reminded her of the sky before a storm. "What do you do, Griffin?" she asked as they sat down to breakfast. "For a living, I mean." "Bit of everything," he replied, pouring honey over his oatmeal. "I raise horses, mainly break and train them for the ranchers and mines. Do some hunting and trapping in winter. Occasional ranch work when extra hands are needed." Clara nodded. It explained his capable demeanor and the calluses on his hands. "Have you lived here long?" "About 5 years." He seemed more comfortable answering direct questions than making conversation. "Came west after the war." The war between the states had ended 7 years earlier, but its shadow still loomed large over the nation. Clara wondered which side he'd fought for, but thought it impolite to ask. Many men who had come west after the conflict preferred to leave those memories behind. "I should go into town today," Clara said, changing the subject. "To inquire about work and to see what's become of my husband." Griffin's expression remained neutral. "Wouldn't advise that just yet. Rowley's men will be watching for you and your husband might not be in the best state." Clara frowned. "But I can't simply hide out here. Henry might be worried and I should at least—" "Clara," Griffin interrupted gently, "from what little I heard yesterday, your husband gambled away your home and left you to face Rowley alone. Do you really think he's worried about you now?" The blunt truth of his words stung, but Clara couldn't deny their accuracy. Henry hadn't come looking for her at the church or anywhere else in town. He'd abandoned her to the consequences of his actions without a backward glance. "Even so, I can't impose on you indefinitely," she insisted. "I need to find work, make plans." Griffin considered this for a moment. "There's plenty of work right here if you're willing. Place could use a woman's touch and I've got mending that's been piling up for months. I'd pay you fair wages." Clara blinked in surprise. "You're offering me a job?" "Seems practical," he shrugged. "You need work. I need help around the place. When spring comes, you can decide what you want to do next." It was a sensible suggestion, one that would give her time to recover from the shock of recent events and plan her future more carefully. Still, Clara hesitated. "People will talk if word gets out that I'm living here." "Folks around here mind their own business mostly," Griffin said. "But if it concerns you, we can tell anyone who asks that you're my widowed cousin, come to keep house for me." The thought of deceiving people didn't sit well with Clara, but she recognized the practicality of the suggestion. Her reputation was one of the few things she still possessed, and she couldn't afford to lose it. "Very well," she agreed finally. "I accept your offer, Griffin. Thank you." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Good. Now, how do you feel about chickens?" "Been thinking of getting some, but never got around to building a coop." Clara found herself smiling back. "I happen to be quite experienced with chickens. My mother kept a flock of Rhode Island Reds." "Then it's settled. We'll go into Jackson next week. It's far enough from San Andreas that you won't likely be recognized and get some hens. In the meantime, I can show you around the place after breakfast." The tour of Griffin's property took most of the morning. The cabin sat on about 10 acres of land, with the creek forming a natural boundary on one side. The corral currently held 4 horses Griffin's bay. The dun mare Clara had ridden the previous evening, and 2 young colts that Griffin was training for a rancher in the next valley. "This is where I'm planning to build the chicken coop," he explained, indicating a spot near a cluster of oak trees. "Gets morning sun but afternoon shade." Clara nodded approvingly. "It's a good location, close enough to collect eggs easily but far enough that their noise won't disturb the house." They continued to the vegetable garden, which was surprisingly well tended. Rows of late-season vegetables, carrots, turnips, and cabbages stood ready for harvest, while a small herb patch provided seasonings for Griffin's cooking. "You've done well here," Clara observed, genuinely impressed. Many bachelor homesteads she'd seen were haphazard affairs, with minimal attention paid to comfort or sustainability. Griffin, however, had created a truly self-sufficient home. "It's a work in progress," he replied, but she could tell he was pleased by her approval. "Come winter, we'll be glad of these root vegetables. They'll keep in the root cellar for months." As they walked back toward the cabin, Clara found herself relaxing for the first time in days. There was something soothing about Griffin's calm presence and the orderly world he'd created here. It was a stark contrast to the chaos that had characterized her life with Henry, where each day brought new anxieties and disappointments. "I should get to work," Griffin said as they reached the cabin. "Feel free to familiarize yourself with the house. Anything you want to change or move around, go ahead. It's your home now too, at least for the winter." Your home. The words sent an unexpected wave of emotion through Clara. She hadn't allowed herself to fully process the loss of her family home, but Griffin's matter-of-fact statement brought it rushing back. "Thank you," she managed, blinking back sudden tears. "I'll start by taking inventory of what needs mending." Griffin nodded and headed toward the corral, leaving Clara to compose herself. She took a deep breath and entered the cabin, determined to be useful rather than mournful. The past was gone, but the present offered unexpected sanctuary, and perhaps the future held promise she couldn't yet imagine. The days fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Clara rose early each morning to prepare breakfast while Griffin tended to the horses. They would eat together, discussing plans for the day before separating for their respective tasks. Clara kept the cabin immaculately clean, mended Griffin's clothes, and began putting together lists of supplies they would need for winter. Griffin worked with the horses, hunted for fresh meat, and started construction on the chicken coop. In the evenings, they would share supper by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. Clara learned that Griffin had fought for the Union during the war, serving as a cavalry scout in Tennessee and Georgia. He spoke little of those experiences, but she gathered they had left deep scars, both physical and emotional. "Is that why you came west?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "To escape the memories." Griffin stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "Partly. Also needed to start fresh. My family's farm in Pennsylvania was gone. Bank took it while I was away fighting. Didn't see much point in staying." Clara nodded, understanding all too well the pain of losing one's home. "I'm sorry," he shrugged. "Worked out in the end. I like it here. Land's good, people mostly leave me be." "Don't you get lonely?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Griffin's eyes met hers briefly. "Sometimes, but loneliness is preferable to some of the alternatives." Clara thought of her marriage to Henry, the arguments, the disappointments, the growing fear as his behavior became more erratic. "Yes," she said softly. "I suppose it can be." A week passed, then 2. Clara sent a letter to her friend Martha in San Andreas, simply stating that she was safe and staying with relatives for the winter. She asked Martha to inquire discreetly about Henry, not because she was considering returning to him, but because she needed to know her legal situation. Martha's reply came via the postal rider who delivered mail to the farms and homesteads in the area once a week. Henry, it seemed, had left town the day after gambling away their home. Rumor had it he'd headed for the silver mines in Nevada. Rowley had indeed taken possession of the house and was renting it to a young couple who had recently arrived in town. "I suppose that's that then," Clara said, folding the letter carefully and placing it in her apron pocket. She and Griffin were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and crimson. "You all right?" Griffin asked, studying her face in the fading light. Clara considered the question honestly. "Strangely, yes. I think I've known for some time that my marriage was over in all but name. This just makes it official," she sighed. "Though I suppose I'm still legally his wife, abandoned or not." Griffin nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Abandonment is grounds for divorce in California if it comes to that. After a year, you'd have a case." Clara looked at him in surprise. "You're familiar with divorce law," a shadow crossed his face. "Had cause to look into it once." Clara sensed there was more to that story, but Griffin's tone discouraged further questions. Instead, she changed the subject. "Do you still want to go to Jackson tomorrow for the chickens?" "If you're up for it," Griffin replied. "Might do you good to get out for a while." The trip to Jackson the following day marked Clara's first venture beyond Griffin's property since her arrival. The town was larger than San Andreas, having weathered the boom and bust cycle of the gold rush years better than many mining settlements. Its main street boasted several substantial brick buildings alongside the typical wooden structures, and the general store was well stocked with goods from Sacramento and San Francisco. Clara felt a curious mix of anxiety and excitement as they drove Griffin's wagon into town. She was dressed in her best gown, with a shawl borrowed from Griffin's storage chest, "Belonged to my mother," he'd explained briefly, and she'd taken extra care with her hair that morning. "Remember, you're my widowed cousin from back east," Griffin reminded her as they approached the town. Clara nodded, though the deception still made her uncomfortable. "Clara Paxton, recently widowed, come west to make a new start." "That's close enough to the truth," Griffin said with a hint of a smile. Their first stop was the general store, where Griffin introduced her to the proprietor, Mr. Simmons, as his cousin. If the storekeeper found anything suspicious about Griffin suddenly acquiring a female relative, he didn't show it. He was polite and helpful, assisting them in gathering the supplies on Clara's carefully prepared list. "Your cousin has a good eye for quality, Mr. Paxton," Simmons remarked as Clara selected bolts of sturdy cotton fabric. "Most of the ladies prefer the fancy calicos these days." "Clara has practical tastes," Griffin replied, a note of pride in his voice that wasn't entirely feigned. They purchased flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples that would see them through the winter, along with the fabric Clara needed for sewing projects. Their next stop was a farm at the edge of town, where they acquired 6 laying hens and a rooster, carefully housed in wooden crates for the journey home. The day was surprisingly pleasant. Clara found herself enjoying the simple outing, the chance to interact with people other than Griffin, and the novelty of being introduced as Mrs. Paxton. For a few hours, she could pretend that her life hadn't been shattered, that she was simply a woman running errands with a male relative. They were loading the last of their purchases into the wagon when a voice called out, "Griffin Paxton, as I live and breathe. Didn't expect to see you in town until spring thaw." Clara turned to see a tall man approaching, dressed in the distinctive uniform of the county sheriff. Griffin straightened, a genuine smile crossing his face. "Sheriff Edwards," Good to see you." The sheriff clapped Griffin on the shoulder before turning curious eyes to Clara. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "My cousin, Clara Paxton," Griffin said smoothly. "Recently widowed and come to stay with me for a while. Clara, this is Sheriff James Edwards, an old friend." Clara extended her hand, trying to appear natural. "Pleased to meet you, Sheriff." Edwards took her hand gently. "My condolences on your loss, Mrs. Paxton. But you couldn't ask for a better man than Griffin here to look after you. He saved my life during the war, did he tell you that?" Clara glanced at Griffin, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "No, he didn't mention it. Course he didn't. Too modest by half." Edwards grinned. "Pulled me out from under enemy fire at Shiloh with a bullet in his own shoulder. Carried me 2 miles back to camp." Griffin cleared his throat. "That was a long time ago, James. We should be getting back before dark." Edwards nodded, but his eyes were shrewd as they moved between Griffin and Clara. "Of course. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Paxton. Hope you'll both join Martha and me for Sunday dinner soon." As they drove away from town, Clara mulled over the encounter. "He suspects I'm not your cousin," she finally said. Griffin's hands were steady on the reins. "James is observant, part of what makes him a good sheriff." "Will he cause trouble?" "No," Griffin said confidently. "James Edwards is the soul of discretion, and he owes me more than one favor." Clara relaxed slightly. "He seems to think very highly of you." Griffin shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "We went through some difficult times together. Creates a bond." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking rhythmically, the chickens occasionally clucking in protest at the movement. Clara found her thoughts returning to the sheriff's revelation about Griffin's heroism during the war. It fit with what she was learning about this quiet, honorable man who had opened his home to her without hesitation. "Thank you for today," she said as the cabin came into view. "I enjoyed it more than I expected to." Griffin glanced at her, his expression softening. "Good. You deserve some enjoyment after everything you've been through." The simple statement, delivered in his straightforward manner, touched Clara deeply. In the weeks she'd known Griffin, he had shown her more consideration than Henry had in years of marriage. It was a sobering realization, and one that made her wonder what a true partnership between a man and a woman could be like. As autumn deepened into winter, the bond between Clara and Griffin strengthened. Working together to prepare for the cold months created a sense of shared purpose that Clara found deeply satisfying. They harvested the last of the garden vegetables, preserved food for the winter, and finished the chicken coop, which quickly became Clara's domain. The fresh eggs added welcome variety to their meals, and Clara took pride in caring for the birds that had adapted well to their new home. The first snow fell in late November, dusting the landscape in white and transforming the cabin into a picture-perfect winter scene. Clara stood at the window, watching the flakes swirl in the wind, a cup of hot coffee warming her hands. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Griffin said, coming to stand beside her. Clara nodded. "I've always loved the first snow. My father used to say it was the earth putting on its Sunday best." Griffin smiled a real smile that reached his eyes, something that happened more frequently these days. "Your father sounds like he had a way with words." "He did," Clara agreed, nostalgia warming her voice. "He was a school teacher before he came west, always had his nose in a book." "Is that where you get it from?" Griffin nodded toward the volume of Dickens that lay open on Clara's chair. She had been working her way through Griffin's surprisingly extensive library, discovering a shared love of literature. "I suppose so," Clara smiled. "Though my mother always claimed I was born curious." Griffin turned to face her fully, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've been meaning to ask you something, Clara." Her heart skipped a beat at his serious tone. "Yes, Christmas is coming in a few weeks." I usually don't make much of it, being on my own, but I thought perhaps this year. Well, would you like to have a proper celebration? The question was so unexpected and so touchingly delivered that Clara felt a sudden rush of affection for this man who continued to surprise her. I would like that very much, Griffin. His face relaxed into a smile. Good. We could cut a tree from the north slope. There are some nice pines up there. And I could make decorations, Clara added, warming to the idea. Paper chains, popcorn strings. My mother and I used to make ornaments from dried apple slices and cinnamon. Sounds nice, Griffin said, a wistful note in his voice. Haven't had a proper Christmas since before the war. Clara impulsively touched his arm, a gesture of comfort that felt natural despite their usual careful maintenance of physical boundaries. Then, we shall have to make this one special. Something shifted in Griffin's eyes as he looked down at her hand on his arm, a flash of emotion quickly controlled. I'd like that, he said softly. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Clara became acutely aware of their proximity, of the warmth of his arm beneath her fingers, of the way his eyes held hers. For a breathless second, she thought he might move closer, might bridge the careful distance they had maintained these past weeks. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks that broke the spell. Clara withdrew her hand, suddenly self-conscious. I should check on the bread, she murmured, moving toward the kitchen area. Griffin nodded, turning back to the window. I'll bring in more firewood before the snow gets heavier. As Clara punched down the rising bread dough, she tried to make sense of her conflicted emotions. She was still legally married to Henry, abandoned though she might be. And yet, she couldn't deny the growing attraction she felt toward Griffin, not merely gratitude for his kindness, but a genuine appreciation for the man himself. His quiet strength, his integrity, his consideration for others. It was too soon, she told herself firmly. Too complicated. Better to focus on the present, on making a home here for the winter, on building a friendship with Griffin that could sustain them through the cold months ahead. The future, with all its uncertainties, would have to wait. The days leading up to Christmas were filled with preparations that brought a festive spirit to the cabin. Griffin cut a small pine tree from the hillside and set it up in the corner of the main room. Clara fashioned ornaments from whatever materials she could find: pine cones collected from the forest floor, paper stars cut from old newspapers, strings of popcorn and dried berries. She even managed to bake gingerbread cookies using the last of their molasses, cutting them into simple shapes to hang on the tree. Griffin contributed by carving small wooden ornaments, stars, angels, and animals that revealed yet another hidden talent. His large hands, capable of breaking wild horses and building sturdy structures, could also create delicate, beautiful objects that Clara treasured. Where did you learn to carve like this? She asked one evening, admiring a perfectly formed wooden bird he had just completed. Griffin shrugged, but looked pleased by her admiration. My grandfather taught me. He was a furniture maker back in Pennsylvania. Used to say that wood already knows what it wants to be, the carver just helps it along. Clara smiled, hanging the bird on a prominent branch. He was a wise man. These are beautiful, Griffin. Glad you like them, he replied, his voice gruff with emotion he rarely displayed. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire after supper, admiring their handiwork. The tree glowed warmly in the firelight, the handmade ornaments casting interesting shadows on the walls. Outside, snow fell steadily, insulating the cabin in a blanket of silence. I have something for you, Griffin said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. It's not much, but... He handed her a small package wrapped in a scrap of cloth. Clara unwrapped it carefully to reveal a pendant, a small wooden heart on a leather cord, polished to a warm glow and intricately carved with a pattern of leaves and flowers. "Griffin," she breathed, running her finger over the delicate design. "It's exquisite." "Thought you might like something pretty," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Doesn't seem right, a woman like you going without nice things." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. The gift was more meaningful than any expensive trinket could have been made by his own hands, with thought and care evident in every detail. "I love it," she said simply, holding it out to him along with the cord. "Would you help me put it on?" Griffin took the pendant, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that sent warmth spreading through her. Clara turned, lifting her hair to expose the nape of her neck. She felt his presence behind her, solid and reassuring as he carefully placed the cord around her throat and tied it securely. His fingers lingered briefly at the base of her neck, a touch so light she might have imagined it. "Thank you," she said, turning back to face him, one hand touching the pendant where it rested against her collarbone. Griffin's eyes were dark with emotion. "Suits you." Clara smiled, then remembered her own gift. "I have something for you as well, though it's not as beautiful as this." She retrieved a package from her room, a scarf she had knitted from wool yarn purchased in Jackson. Dark blue with a simple pattern that had taken her weeks of secret evening work to complete. Griffin unwrapped it with careful hands, his face softening as he ran his fingers over the soft wool. "You made this," Clara nodded. "I noticed your old one was rather threadbare." He wrapped it around his neck immediately, the blue bringing out the color of his eyes. "It's perfect. Thank you, Clara." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire and enjoying the simple pleasure of exchanged gifts. Clara felt a contentment that had been absent from her life for too long, a sense of being exactly where she belonged. "I never expected this," Griffin said suddenly, his voice low. Clara looked at him questioningly. "The scarf, this," he gestured between them. "Having someone to share Christmas with again, having you here." He paused, searching for words. "It's changed things." Clara understood. The cabin had been transformed by her presence, not just by the physical changes she'd made. The curtains she'd sewn, or the organization she'd brought to Griffin's bachelor existence, but by the simple fact of two people sharing space and lives, creating something new together. "It's changed things for me too," she admitted. "When I left San Andreas, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I'd find." She hesitated, uncertain how to express the complex emotions she felt. "A home," Griffin suggested gently. Clara nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Yes, a home." The word hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the physical structure that sheltered them. Home was safety, comfort, belonging, all the things Clara had thought lost forever when Henry gambled away her inheritance. Griffin reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and covered her hand with his. His touch was warm and solid, anchoring her to the present moment. "You have a home here, Clara, for as long as you want it." The simple declaration, offered without demands or expectations, moved her deeply. "Thank you," she whispered, turning her hand to twine her fingers with his. They sat that way for a long time, hands joined, watching the fire burn low while snow continued to fall outside, transforming the world into a pristine white canvas that awaited new beginnings. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, the storm having passed during the night, leaving behind a glittering landscape of untouched snow. Clara woke early, feeling a childlike excitement she hadn't experienced in years. She dressed quickly and moved to the kitchen to prepare a special breakfast, her mother's recipe for cinnamon rolls that she'd been saving for this occasion. Griffin emerged from the lean-to, where he still insisted on sleeping despite Clara's protests, that he should reclaim his proper bedroom now that she was settled. He wore the blue scarf around his neck, and the sight filled Clara with quiet pleasure. "Merry Christmas," she greeted him, gesturing to the dough she was rolling out. "I hope you're hungry." "Merry Christmas," he returned, his smile warming his typically serious face. "Smells wonderful in here." They shared a leisurely breakfast, talking and laughing with an ease that had developed between them over the past months. Afterward, Griffin surprised her by producing a small bottle of brandy he'd been saving for a special occasion. "For the plum pudding," he explained, placing it on the table. "Thought we might have a proper Christmas dinner." The day unfolded in peaceful domesticity. They prepared the meal together, a roast chicken from their flock. Griffin had insisted on raising some birds for meat alongside the laying hens, vegetables from their store, and the plum pudding Clara had made weeks earlier and kept wrapped in cloth. The work was interspersed with conversation and occasional laughter, creating memories that Clara tucked away like precious treasures. As they sat down to their feast, Clara looked around at the festive cabin, the decorated tree, the table set with Griffin's best dishes, the man himself looking relaxed and content across from her, and felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it?" Griffin asked, noticing her emotion. Clara shook her head, smiling through her tears. "I'm just happy. Truly happy for the first time in a very long while." Griffin's expression softened. "Me too." The admission, simple as it was, represented a significant shift. Griffin rarely spoke of his feelings, preferring to let his actions communicate what words could not. For him to acknowledge happiness was remarkable, and Clara felt honored to have played a part in bringing it about. They lingered over dinner, savoring both the food and the company. As dusk fell, they moved to the chairs by the fire, where Griffin surprised her again by taking out a battered copy of Dickens' A Christmas Carol and offering to read aloud. "My father used to read it every Christmas Eve," he explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "Thought you might enjoy the tradition." Clara settled into her chair, content to listen as Griffin's deep voice brought the familiar story to life. She watched his face in the firelight, noting the way his expression changed as he read, revealing a sensitivity and emotional depth that he usually kept carefully hidden. When he finished the final page, closing the book with reverent hands, Clara found herself overcome with a feeling she could no longer deny or ignore. Somewhere between gratitude and friendship, between shared work and shared dreams, she had fallen in love with Griffin Paxton. The realization should have frightened her. She was still legally bound to Henry, still recovering from the wounds of her failed marriage. And yet, it felt right, as if her heart had recognized what her mind was only now acknowledging, that true love was built on mutual respect, shared values, and everyday kindnesses. All the things she had with Griffin. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "It's been perfect." Griffin's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a reflection of her own feelings, hope, longing, and something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. "Yes," he agreed. "It has." The winter deepened, bringing harsh storms that sometimes confined them to the cabin for days at a time. Far from finding these periods of isolation difficult, Clara treasured them. She and Griffin settled into a comfortable rhythm, reading aloud to each other in the evenings, playing chess with a set he had carved years earlier, and talking for hours about everything and nothing. Clara learned that beneath Griffin's quiet exterior lay a thoughtful mind with strong opinions on politics, literature, and the changes sweeping the country. He, in turn, discovered her quick wit and practical intelligence, qualities that had been suppressed during her years with Henry. "You should have been a teacher like your father," Griffin remarked one evening after she had explained a complex passage from one of his books. "You have a gift for making difficult ideas clear." Clara looked up from her sewing, surprised and touched by the observation. "I wanted to be once. But then I met Henry and he didn't approve," Griffin guessed, his expression darkening slightly at the mention of her husband. "He didn't see the point," Clara corrected, remembering Henry's dismissive laugh when she'd mentioned her ambition. "Said a man doesn't marry a woman to have her spending her days with other people's children." Griffin shook his head. "Sounds like Henry had some peculiar ideas about marriage." "He did," Clara agreed, her hands stilling in her lap. "He believed a wife should be decorative and obedient, nothing more. When I failed at the first, he became increasingly insistent on the second. It was the closest she had come to discussing the darker aspects of her marriage." Griffin studied her face, his eyes serious. "Did he hurt you, Clara?" The question was gentle but direct. Clara considered deflecting it as she had similar inquiries in the past, but something in Griffin's steady gaze encouraged honesty. "Not often, and never badly enough to leave marks that would raise questions," she admitted. "But yes, sometimes. Especially when he'd been drinking." Griffin's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek as he controlled his anger. "If he ever comes back, he won't," Clara interrupted firmly. "Henry's not the type to face his failures. He'll have found some new opportunity, some new person to charm with his promises." Griffin nodded, though the protective look in his eyes remained. "Still, if he does, you don't have to face him alone, not ever again." The simple vow, delivered without drama but with absolute conviction, touched Clara deeply. "I know," she said softly, "and that means more than I can say." As January gave way to February, Clara began to notice subtle changes in Griffin's behavior. He sought out her company more deliberately, finding reasons to be in the cabin when she was working rather than attending to outdoor tasks. His customary reserve softened, allowing her glimpses of a playful side she hadn't known existed. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she would catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. Clara knew they were approaching a crossroads. The feelings between them were growing stronger, harder to ignore. Yet the obstacle remained. She was still legally married to a man who had abandoned her but not released her. The issue came to a head one stormy evening in late February. They had finished supper and were sitting by the fire, Griffin carving a new chess piece to replace one that had been damaged, Clara working on a dress from the fabric she had purchased in Jackson. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and sending occasional puffs of smoke back down the chimney. "I was thinking," Griffin said suddenly, setting down his carving knife. "When spring comes, we could ride into Sacramento, speak to a lawyer about your situation." Clara looked up, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "You mean about a divorce?" Griffin nodded, his eyes serious. "Henry's been gone nearly 4 months now. No word, no support. That's abandonment by any legal definition." "You've been thinking about this," Clara observed, carefully setting her sewing aside. "Yes." Griffin's gaze was steady. "I think you deserve to be free, Clara, free to make your own choices about your future." The implication hung in the air between them. Clara's heart raced as she considered his words and what lay beneath them. "And if I were free, what then?" Griffin stood and moved to kneel beside her chair, a position that brought their faces level. It was the closest they had been since that Christmas Eve moment by the fire. "Then," he said softly, "I would ask you to consider staying, not as my housekeeper or my pretend cousin, but as—" He faltered, and Clara saw uncertainty in his eyes, a fear of rejection that touched her deeply. This strong, capable man who had faced enemy fire and carved out a life in the wilderness was nervous about revealing his heart to her. As what, Griffin? She prompted gently, though she knew the answer. As my wife, he finished, his voice low but firm. If you could see your way to accepting a man like me. Clara's throat tightened with emotion. A man like you? You mean an honorable, kind, intelligent man who offered shelter and respect to a desperate woman when she had nowhere else to turn? Griffin looked down, uncomfortable with her praise. I'm rough around the edges, Clara. Not educated like your father, or smooth-talking like Henry probably was. Just a former soldier who's good with horses and lives too far from town for most people's liking. Griffin, Clara said, reaching out to touch his cheek, guiding his face back up to meet her gaze. Those things you see as shortcomings are what I admire most about you. Your straightforward nature, your self-sufficiency, your quiet strength. She took a deep breath. I would be honored to become your wife, once I'm free to do so. The joy that transformed his face was beautiful to behold. Griffin covered her hand with his, turning to press a kiss to her palm, a gesture of such tenderness that it brought tears to her eyes. I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood up to Rolly in that saloon, he confessed. But I never thought that I could feel the same. Clara smiled through her tears. How could I not, Griffin? You've shown me what true partnership can be. What it means to be valued for myself, not just as someone's possession. Griffin rose to his feet, still holding her hand, and gently drew her up to stand with him. May I kiss you, Clara? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. The question, so respectful of her boundaries even now, confirmed everything she felt for him. Yes, she whispered, lifting her face to his. Griffin's lips met hers in a kiss that began gentle and questioning but quickly deepened as years of loneliness and months of growing attraction found expression. Clara's arms wound around his neck as his encircled her waist, drawing her closer. The storm outside faded from awareness, replaced by the thundering of her heart and the exquisite feeling of finally being exactly where she belonged. When they eventually parted, both breathless and flushed, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Clara, he said simply. Have for months now. And I love you, she replied, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. I think I started falling the moment you offered me your home and asked for nothing in return. Griffin smiled, a full, unguarded smile that transformed his features. I did ask for something eventually, Clara laughed softly. Yes, you did, and I'm very glad of it. They stood together by the fire, talking quietly of plans and hopes, of a future they would build together once the legal obstacles were removed. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, as if nature itself approved of the harmony they had found within the cabin walls. March brought the first hints of spring, patches of green appearing beneath the melting snow, birds returning to nest in the trees near the cabin, days growing noticeably longer. Clara felt her spirits lifting with the changing season, her hope for the future strengthening as the land awakened around them. She and Griffin had settled into a new dynamic since their declarations of love. While they maintained certain boundaries out of respect for her still legal marriage, they no longer hid their feelings for each other. Small touches, brief kisses, and open expressions of affection became part of their daily life, bringing a joy to the cabin that made even routine tasks feel special. They began making concrete plans for the journey to Sacramento as soon as the mountain passes were clear. Griffin had written to a lawyer recommended by Sheriff Edwards, explaining Clara's situation and requesting an appointment. The response had been encouraging, with evidence of Henry's abandonment and witnesses to corroborate their account. Clara had excellent grounds for divorce. We could be married by summer's end, Griffin remarked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in vibrant colors. His arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, Clara leaning against his side. "That soon?" Clara looked up at him, smiling at the thought. "It seems almost too good to be true." Griffin pressed a kiss to her temple. "After everything you've been through, you deserve some good fortune." Clara was about to respond when the sound of approaching hoofbeats caught their attention. Visitors were rare, especially in the evening hours. Griffin stood, instinctively moving in front of Clara in a protective gesture. "Stay here," he said, reaching for the rifle he kept by the door. "Griffin," Clara protested, rising to stand beside him. It's probably just her words died in her throat as the rider came into view. Even at a distance, there was no mistaking Henry Dawson's lanky frame or the distinctive way he sat a horse slightly hunched forward, as if perpetually ready to urge the animal faster. "It's him," she whispered, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. "It's Henry." Griffin's expression hardened. "Go inside, Clara." "No," she said firmly, placing a hand on his arm. "I need to face him. We both do." Griffin looked down at her, concern evident in his eyes. "You don't owe him anything." "I know," Clara assured him, "but I need to do this, for myself." After a moment's hesitation, Griffin nodded, though he kept the rifle in his hands as Henry approached the cabin. Clara took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation ahead. Whatever Henry wanted, whatever he had come to say, she was no longer the frightened, desperate woman he had abandoned months ago. Henry reined his horse to a stop in front of the porch, his gaze moving between Clara and Griffin with undisguised suspicion. He looked thinner than Clara remembered, his clothes shabby and trail-worn, his once handsome face now haggard and marked by new lines. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice carrying the slight slur that indicated he'd been drinking. "Quite a cozy scene I've interrupted." Clara lifted her chin. "Hello, Henry. It's been a long time." Henry dismounted, swaying slightly as his boots hit the ground. 4 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, if anyone's counting. His bloodshot eyes narrowed. "But it seems you haven't been, have you, Clara? Too busy setting up house with your new man." Griffin tensed beside her, but Clara placed a restraining hand on his arm. "What do you want, Henry? Why are you here?" Henry spread his hands in a gesture of mock innocence. "Can't a man come looking for his wife? I've been searching all over creation for you, Clara." "Quite the scandal you caused, disappearing like that. People talking all over town." "People were talking before I left," Clara replied evenly. "About how you gambled away our home and left me to face Rowley alone." Henry's face darkened. "That snake cheated me." "Perhaps," Clara conceded. "But it wasn't the first time you'd gambled with our livelihood, was it? Just the last straw." Henry took a step forward, his expression turning ugly. "You had no right to leave. You're my wife. You took vows." "So did you," Clara countered, finding strength in Griffin's solid presence beside her. "To love, honor, and cherish, to provide and protect. You broke those vows long before I left San Andreas." Henry's gaze shifted to Griffin, who stood quietly watchful, the rifle held casually but ready. "And who's this? Your protector? Your lover?" "This is Griffin Paxton," Clara said calmly. "He offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. Something my husband should have done, but didn't." Henry laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Always the virtuous one, aren't you, Clara? So tell me, does Paxton here know he's harboring another man's wife? That you're committing adultery under his roof?" Clara felt her face flush with anger. "That's not, it's written all over both of you," Henry interrupted, his voice rising. "Don't insult my intelligence by denying it." Griffin spoke for the first time, his voice level but with an underlying steel. "Mr. Dawson, you abandoned your wife with no means of support and no word for over 4 months. You forfeited any right to judge her actions." Henry's hand moved toward his hip, where Clara now noticed he wore a pistol. "This doesn't concern you, Paxton. This is between me and my wife." Griffin raised the rifle slightly, not pointing it at Henry, but making its presence unmistakable. "Clara isn't going anywhere she doesn't want to go. I suggest you state your business and be on your way." A tense silence fell as the two men stared at each other, the air crackling with potential violence. Clara's mind raced, trying to find a way to defuse the situation before it escalated further. "Why are you really here, Henry?" she asked quietly. "It's not because you missed me. We both know that." Henry's gaze shifted back to her, and something in his expression changed, a flicker of the charm he could still summon when it suited his purposes. "I've had some luck, Clara. Made a nice strike up in the Nevada territory. Silver, good quality. I've got backing now, investors. Going to be a wealthy man soon." Clara waited, knowing there was more. "Thought maybe we could start fresh," Henry continued, his tone wheedling now. "Put the past behind us. I made mistakes, I admit it, but I've changed. This time will be different." The words were painfully familiar promises Henry had made and broken countless times before. Clara felt a surge of gratitude for the strength she had found these past months, for the clarity that allowed her to see through his manipulations. "No, Henry," she said firmly. "I'm not coming back with you, not now, not ever." Henry's face contorted with anger. "You don't have a choice. You're my wife, legally bound to me. I could have the sheriff arrest both of you for adultery." "You could try," Griffin interjected calmly. "But Sheriff Edwards is a personal friend, and abandonment is grounds for divorce in California. Clara has witnesses to your desertion and gambling away of your mutual property." Henry's eyes darted between them, calculating. "Divorce takes time and money. I could make things very difficult for both of you." "Or," Clara suggested, finding a calm she wouldn't have believed possible months ago, "you could sign divorce papers now, walk away, and concentrate on your silver mine without the complication of a wife who doesn't want to be with you." Henry stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The Clara he had known submissive, afraid to challenge him, had been replaced by this confident woman who met his gaze steadily and spoke with quiet authority. "You've changed," he finally said, a note of grudging respect in his voice. "Yes," Clara agreed. "I have." Henry looked away, his gaze taking in the well-maintained cabin, the vegetable garden preparing for spring planting, the chicken coop where the hens were settling in for the night. His shoulders slumped slightly, the bravado draining out of him. "I need a drink," he muttered. Griffin lowered the rifle. "There's coffee inside, and we can discuss terms like civilized people." Henry hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Fine, but I'll need something stronger than coffee to sign away my wife." To Clara's surprise, Griffin produced a bottle of whiskey from the cupboard, one she hadn't known he possessed. The three of them sat at the table, an uneasy truce established as Griffin outlined the terms. Henry would sign papers acknowledging abandonment and agreeing to a divorce, in exchange for Clara making no financial claims against his future earnings. "And what do you get out of this, Paxton?" Henry asked, glass in hand, eyes shrewder than his disheveled appearance suggested. Griffin met his gaze steadily. "I get to marry Clara once she's free, if she'll have me." The blunt honesty of the statement seemed to take Henry by surprise. He looked at Clara, who nodded in confirmation. "Well," Henry said after a moment, draining his glass, "at least you're honest about it." He pushed the empty glass toward Griffin for a refill. "Not like that snake Rowley." As the whiskey worked its way into Henry's system, his hostility gradually gave way to a maudlin sentimentality. He reminisced about the early days of his marriage to Clara, admitted his failings in slurred half-sentences, and finally signed the papers Griffin had prepared with a flourish that nearly tore the page. "There," he declared, pushing the papers across the table. You're almost free of me, Clara. Hope Paxton here treats you better than I did. Not that that's a high bar to clear. He laughed bitterly at his own joke. You should stay the night, Griffin said, surprising both Clara and Henry. It's dark and you've been drinking. The lean-to has a decent bed. Henry eyed him suspiciously. Why would you offer that? Griffin shrugged. Because it's the right thing to do, and because I'd rather not have your death on my conscience if you ride off and break your neck in a gully. Henry considered this, then nodded slowly. Suppose that's sensible. He looked at Clara, a flash of the charm that had once captivated her crossing his face. Always were too good for me, weren't you? Too kind, too forgiving. Get some sleep, Henry, Clara said gently. Things will look clearer in the morning. As Griffin showed Henry to the lean-to, Clara sat at the table, the signed papers before her, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Relief predominated. The first hurdle to her freedom had been cleared with unexpected ease. But there was also a tinge of sadness for the young, hopeful woman who had married Henry believing in forever, and for the man Henry might have been if not for the demons that drove him. Griffin returned a few minutes later, his expression troubled. He's settled. Passed out almost as soon as he hit the bed. Clara looked up at him. Thank you for handling that so well, for not shooting him on sight. Griffin's mouth quirked in a small smile. I considered it. I'm glad you didn't, Clara said sincerely. Not just because it would have been wrong, but because this is better, cleaner. Griffin sat beside her, taking her hand in his. Are you all right? That couldn't have been easy facing him again. Clara considered the question honestly. Yes, I think I am. Seeing Henry now, I realized something important. I've been carrying guilt about leaving, about failing to make our marriage work. But the person I married exists only in my memory if he was ever real at all. She squeezed Griffin's hand. You've shown me what a true partnership can be, what mutual respect and affection look like in everyday life. I can't regret finding that, even if the path here was difficult. Griffin brought her hand to his lips. We'll take these papers to Sacramento as soon as the pass is clear. Start our future together properly. Clara nodded, hope rising in her heart. Yes, our future. Morning brought a subdued Henry to the cabin door, sober and visibly uncomfortable. Clara offered him breakfast, which he accepted with a mumbled thanks, avoiding Griffin's watchful gaze. As he prepared to leave, Henry paused at the door, turning to Clara with an expression she had rarely seen on his face, genuine regret. I did love you once, Clara, in my own way. I know, she replied softly. I wish you well, Henry. I hope you find what you're looking for. He nodded, glancing around the cabin one last time before settling his hat firmly on his head. Take care of her, Paxton, he said to Griffin. She deserves better than either of us, but since she's chosen you, I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of that choice, Griffin replied with quiet dignity. With a final nod, Henry mounted his horse and rode away, a solitary figure growing smaller against the landscape, until he disappeared from view entirely, the last visible link to Clara's former life vanishing with him. Clara stood on the porch long after Henry had gone, Griffin's arm around her shoulders providing silent support. A chapter had closed, and while the legal process of divorce still lay ahead, she knew the emotional separation was complete. She was ready to embrace the future not as Clara Dawson, defined by a failed marriage and lost home, but as herself, Clara, a woman who had discovered her own strength and found love in the most unexpected of circumstances. What are you thinking? Griffin asked, his voice gentle. Clara turned to him, a smile lighting her face. I'm thinking about beginnings, about building a life with you, about how something that seemed like the end of everything turned out to be the start of something beautiful. Griffin's arms encircled her fully, drawing her close. I love you, Clara. Have since almost the beginning, though I tried not to. I'm glad you failed, she teased, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly against her lips. He murmured, so am I. Spring arrived in earnest, transforming the landscape with vibrant life. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, trees burst into leaf, and the creek ran high with snowmelt from the mountains. Griffin and Clara made their journey to Sacramento, where a sympathetic judge reviewed their case and, given Henry's signed admission of abandonment, granted an expedited divorce decree. It feels strange, Clara admitted as they left the courthouse, the official papers in hand, to be legally free after all this time. Griffin squeezed her hand. Good strange or bad strange? Good, she decided after a moment's reflection. Like putting down a burden I've been carrying for years without realizing how heavy it was. They spent 2 days in the city, enjoying the novelty of restaurants, shops, and theaters, luxuries unavailable in their rural life. Clara purchased fabric for a wedding dress, choosing a soft blue that reminded her of the pendant Griffin had carved for her at Christmas, which she now wore every day. I have a surprise for you, Griffin said on their last evening in Sacramento as they walked back to their hotel from dinner. Been waiting for the right time to tell you. Clara looked up at him curiously. What is it? I bought the adjacent property, the Johnson place. Old man Johnson decided to move to Oregon to be near his daughter. It's good grazing land with a small orchard already established. Clara's eyes widened. Griffin, that's wonderful, but how? When? Had some savings, he explained. And the colts I've been training fetched a good price. Been negotiating with Johnson by mail for months. Finalized it this morning while you were shopping. Why didn't you tell me? Clara asked, touched by the surprise but confused by his secrecy. Griffin looked slightly embarrassed. Wanted to be sure it went through, and he hesitated. Wanted it to be a wedding gift, something we could build on together, expand our operations, maybe raise cattle alongside the horses. Clara stopped walking, turning to face him fully, her heart overflowing with love for this thoughtful man. It's perfect, Griffin. Absolutely perfect. He smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face and made him look years younger. There's one more thing. The property includes a small house newer than our cabin with more rooms. More rooms, Clara repeated, a question in her voice. Griffin's eyes held her steadily. For children, Clara, if you want them. A family of our own. The image his words conjured a home filled with children's laughter, Griffin teaching a small boy to ride, herself nursing a baby while watching toddlers play in the yard brought tears to her eyes. Yes, she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. I want that very much. Griffin kissed her then, right there on the Sacramento street, uncaring of the passers-by who smiled indulgently at the clearly besotted couple. When they parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. 1 month, he said softly. 1 month until I can call you my wife. Clara smiled, joy bubbling up within her like a spring. The longest month of my life, I expect. The wedding was held on a perfect June day, with wildflowers still blooming in the meadows and the air scented with pine and sage. They chose a simple ceremony at the small church in Jackson, with Sheriff Edwards and his wife Martha as witnesses, along with a handful of neighbors and friends who had accepted Clara as part of Griffin's life without question or judgment. Clara wore the blue dress she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair and Griffin's carved pendant at her throat. Griffin, unrecognizable from his usual practical self, wore a new suit purchased in Sacramento, his face clean-shaven for the occasion, his eyes never leaving Clara throughout the ceremony. I, Griffin James Paxton, take thee, Clara Elizabeth, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he vowed, his voice steady and sure. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. Clara repeated the words with a full heart, marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment, from desperate fear to perfect joy, from homelessness to the promise of a future built on love and mutual respect. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Griffin's kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, sealing their vows and beginning their life together as husband and wife. As they turned to face their small gathering of friends, Clara felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in the truest sense. The celebration afterward was held at their cabin, soon to be their former home, as they planned to move to the larger house on the newly purchased property before winter. Food and drink flowed freely, music played, and even Griffin was persuaded to dance, holding Clara close as they swayed beneath the oak tree where they had hung lanterns for the occasion. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Completely," she answered, looking up at him with eyes that shone with love. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Griffin admitted. "When you appeared in that saloon last October, standing up to Rowley with nothing but courage and dignity, I never imagined we'd end up here. I'm glad you offered me your cabin and your protection that day," Clara said softly. "It was the beginning of everything." Griffin's arms tightened around her. "The beginning of our story." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, the guests gradually departed, leaving the newlyweds alone. They stood on the porch, watching the last of the buggies disappear down the road, Griffin's arm securely around Clara's waist. "Mrs. Paxton," he said, testing the name with evident pleasure. "Ready to see our new home?" Clara smiled up at him. "Lead the way, Mr. Paxton." Hand in hand, they walked the short distance to the house on the adjoining property, a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch and ample windows that caught the last of the day's light. Griffin had prepared it secretly, enlisting Sheriff Edwards's help to clean and ready it for their arrival. At the door, Griffin paused, then swept Clara into his arms in one fluid motion. "Tradition," he explained with a smile as she laughed in surprise. He carried her across the threshold into their new home, setting her gently on her feet in a parlor furnished simply but comfortably. Clara moved through the rooms, admiring the space and light, already envisioning the life they would build here together. "It's perfect," she declared, returning to Griffin's side. "Everything I could have wished for." "There's one more thing," Griffin said, taking her hand and leading her upstairs. He opened the door to a small room adjacent to the master bedroom, where a beautifully crafted cradle stood in the center of the otherwise empty space. "I made it," he said, suddenly shy. "For whenever, if you want." Clara touched the smooth wood of the cradle, tears welling in her eyes at the love and hope represented in its careful construction. "It's beautiful, Griffin." She turned to her husband, reaching up to touch his face tenderly. "And yes, I want, very much." His kiss was deeper this time, filled with passion too long restrained. Clara responded with equal fervor, all the love and desire she had held in check during their months of honorable waiting finding expression at last. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new bedroom, Clara nestled in the protective circle of Griffin's arms. She reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. "What are you thinking?" Griffin asked, his voice drowsy with satisfaction. Clara smiled in the darkness. "I was thinking about how something that seemed like the end, Henry, gambling away our home, turned out to be the beginning of everything good in my life. Meeting you, finding a true partnership, creating this home together." Griffin's arms tightened around her. "Sometimes the worst moments lead us to the best places," he agreed, though I wouldn't recommend your particular path to anyone else." Clara laughed softly. "Nor would I. But I wouldn't change a single step if it meant ending up exactly here with you." 5 years later, Clara sat on the wide porch of their home, watching as Griffin taught their 4-year-old son James to brush one of the gentler mares. The boy's serious concentration as he mimicked his father's movements, his small face intent beneath a mop of dark hair, brought a smile to Clara's lips. "Mama, look." 3-year-old Emma tugged at Clara's skirt, proudly displaying a somewhat lopsided daisy chain. "I made it for you." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Clara praised, lifting the little girl onto her lap and allowing her to place the floral crown on her mother's head. "Thank you." In the cradle beside her, baby Thomas slept peacefully, his chubby cheeks flushed with the healthy glow of infancy. At 6 months, he was already showing signs of his father's steady temperament combined with his mother's curious nature. The Paxton Ranch had flourished over the years, expanding from horse breeding into a successful cattle operation. The additional income had allowed them to improve the property significantly, adding a larger barn, expanding the house to accommodate their growing family, and hiring 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload. Clara divided her time between caring for the children, maintaining their home, and pursuing a long-deferred dream. With Griffin's enthusiastic support, she had converted one of the downstairs rooms into a small schoolroom, where she taught not only her own children but also those of neighboring ranchers who lived too far from town to attend regular school. Mrs. Paxton. One of the ranch hands approached the porch, hat in hand. "Sheriff Edwards just rode in. Says he has news you and Mr. Paxton might want to hear." Clara thanked him, curiosity piqued. James Edwards remained a good friend, visiting regularly with his wife Martha, who had become Clara's closest confidante. An unannounced visit in the middle of a busy week was unusual, however. Griffin, having noticed the sheriff's arrival, brought James up to the house, the boy chattering excitedly about the horse he'd helped groom. Griffin listened with evident pride, one hand resting on his son's shoulder. "James," Clara called, "look who's come to visit." Sheriff Edwards climbed the porch steps, removing his hat and wiping his brow in the June heat. "Clara, Griffin, sorry to drop in unannounced." "Always welcome, James," Griffin assured him, shaking the sheriff's hand. "Something wrong in town?" Edwards glanced at the children, then at Clara. "Nothing wrong exactly. But I thought you should know Henry Dawson passed away last week in San Francisco. Got word from the authorities there yesterday." Clara felt a momentary shock, though not the grief one might expect at news of a former husband's death. Henry had become more a distant memory than a real presence in her life, occasionally mentioned in letters from old acquaintances, but otherwise absent from her thoughts. "What happened?" Griffin asked, moving to stand beside Clara's chair, his hand coming to rest protectively on her shoulder. "Consumption, according to the doctor's report," Edwards replied. "He'd been ill for some time, it seems. Left instructions for me to be notified and to pass the news to Clara." He hesitated. "There's a letter as well, found among his effects." He withdrew an envelope from his pocket, holding it out to Clara. She took it with steady hands, recognizing Henry's handwriting on the front. "For Clara to be delivered upon my death." "Thank you, James," she said quietly. "Would you like some refreshment? Martha made lemonade this morning." The sheriff accepted gratefully, and Griffin took the children inside to give Clara a moment alone with the letter. She stared at it for a long time before carefully breaking the seal. Henry's handwriting was shakier than she remembered, the words sometimes trailing off as if he'd lacked the strength to complete them properly. But the message was clear. "Clara, if you're reading this, I've finally done something right, managed to die without causing you further trouble. The doctors say it won't be long now, and I find myself thinking of you and the life we might have had if I'd been a better man. I want you to know that I never blamed you for leaving. You deserved better than what I gave you. I hope you found it with Paxton. He seemed the steady sort, the kind of man who would treat you properly. There's one thing I never told you. I didn't just gamble away our home that night. I cheated trying to win it back. Marked cards. Rowley caught me. That's why he was so set against giving us any leniency. I couldn't admit it then, too proud and angry. But I want to die with a clear conscience, as much as that's possible for a man like me. The silver mine was real, by the way. Turned out to be quite profitable. I'm leaving the proceeds to you and whatever family you've made for yourself. Consider it restitution for the home I took from you. My lawyer in San Francisco, William Gray, has the details. I hope you're happy, Clara, truly happy, in the way I never managed to make you. Henry. Clara folded the letter carefully, tears blurring her vision. Not tears for the man Henry had been during their marriage, but for the man revealed in these final words, capable, in the end, of honesty, regret, and a kind of belated generosity. Griffin returned to the porch, concern evident in his expression. The children are having lemonade with James. Are you all right? Clara handed him the letter wordlessly, watching as he read it, his expression changing from wariness to surprise. Restitution, he murmured, looking up at her. After all this time, Clara nodded. It seems Henry found some measure of redemption before the end. Griffin sat beside her, taking her hand in his. How do you feel about this? Sad, she admitted. Not for what might have been. I've never regretted the path that led me to you and our children, but for Henry himself, for the life he could have had if he'd faced his demons earlier. Griffin nodded, understanding in his eyes. What would you like to do about the inheritance? Clara had already given this some thought. I'd like to establish a school fund for children in the area who can't afford proper education, and perhaps expand our schoolroom here, take on more students. Griffin smiled, pride and love evident in his expression. Always the teacher at heart. I learned from the best, Clara replied, squeezing his hand. You taught me what true strength looks like, Griffin, what love and partnership really mean. They sat together on the porch, hands linked, watching as their children played in the yard with Sheriff Edwards. The ranch stretched before them, cattle grazing in the distance, horses running in the corral, the land they had nurtured together flourishing under their care. Clara thought of that desperate day in San Andreas, when Henry's recklessness had seemed to destroy her life. How could she have known then that it was merely clearing the path for something infinitely better? That a quiet cowboy offering his cabin and his protection would become the center of a life filled with love, purpose, and joy. No regrets? Griffin asked softly, as if reading her thoughts. Clara turned to him, the man who had rebuilt her faith in love and in herself, the father of her children, her partner in everything that mattered. Not a single one, she assured him, leaning in for a kiss that still, after all these years, held the promise of new beginnings. In the distance, their children's laughter mingled with the sounds of the ranch horses nickering, cattle lowing, the rhythmic creak of the windmill that drew water from the earth. It was the soundtrack of a life built on second chances and unexpected blessings, on the courage to leave behind what was broken and embrace what could be healed. Clara Paxton, once homeless and desperate, now found herself the mistress of a thriving ranch, the mother of 3 beautiful children, the wife of a man whose love had never faltered, and the architect of her own happiness. The journey had not been easy, but standing on the other side of hardship, she knew with absolute certainty that every step had been worth taking. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, casting long shadows across the land they had made their own, Clara rested her head on Griffin's shoulder, content in the knowledge that some endings are merely disguised beginnings, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters.